musical frontier. I tried to picture clusters of notes as they move through the computer. What did they look like? Steps? Instruments? Were the circuits like synthesizers? I kept dreaming of a world I thought I'd never see. And then, one day, I got in.
Like Tron Legacy, the hit movie that everyone definitely saw, the Dirtywave M8 is a sleek, polished ode to the video game media that came before it. And like the canonical game of Tron, it's pretty hard not to get sucked in. Also, that intro is almost certainly going to get copyright claimed by Disney, so if you'd like to help fund more high-effort, high-quality videos like this one, consider hopping down into the description and picking up a sound pack, some stickers, or some music. Thank you so much if you choose to do that. But with that being said, let's get into it, with a big focus on not only what this thing is, but more importantly, the user experience. The Dirtywave M8 is a standalone, extremely portable music production device with an internal battery. I'll get to the battery in a bit. Inspired by the Game Boy tracker Little Sound DJ, the M8 levels up what a handheld hardware tracker can be, with a pretty bonkers amount of synthesis and sampling capabilities and a surprisingly intuitive user interface given the limited amount of onboard controls. Once I got used to the interface, I was able to fly around it like a light cycle with just the physical buttons. And while it does have a touchscreen, I rarely ever use it. Like multiple other mid-priced hardware samplers and tracker-like devices, the M8 has 8 tracks, each of which can only play one sound at a time. But you can switch between multiple sounds on each track, allowing you to pretty easily build up a pretty complex and dense arrangement if you've got the patience for it. Each musical idea is broken down into one bar phrases, which you can chain together to create, well, chains, which can then be laid out in the song mode to create a full arrangement. The vertically scrolling notes will take some time to get used to, but once you do, you'll be able to fairly quickly punch in musical ideas with just the built-in onboard controls. Although note that you do have to do all that manually rather than playing stuff in live. Personally, I'm much more used to playing stuff in live and kind of tinkering around on a set of pads to come up with an idea, but I was still able to fairly quickly get into a groove and come up with catchy musical ideas just by manually punching in notes. I made that little musical idea on a train, by the way, which is actually kind of the prime use case. And I probably would want to expand this in my DAW later, which fortunately is quite easy because it's got multi-track export. You can just export WAV files onto the little micro SD card, bring them into your computer, and go from there. And of course, you can bring whatever audio files you want onto it as well, just dragging and dropping onto the micro SD card when it's connected to your computer. Diving deeper into the interface, though, the individual steps contain more than just notes. Like I mentioned earlier, they can also contain instrument data, and you can seamlessly switch between samples and different synthesis engines on a step-by-step basis. And you even have a couple of attributes for each individual note. So you can do stuff like those little note glides that you heard in the melody that I just played for you. Or you can do stuff like ratchets or note rolls. And in addition to those, there are a ton of other parameters that you can work with on a step-by-step basis, including the ability to scoop notes around in time to get some more off-the-grid type stuff, or the ability to basically automate any parameter you want. That includes instrument parameters. And while we're on the topic, the actual selection of instruments is pretty damn impressive. You've got the wave synth, which can crank out some gritty, chiptune type sounds. The macro synth, which is more like a traditional subtractive synth. An FM synth, which can even do chords. And of course, a full-on sampler that even includes the ability to chop samples. The experience of chopping samples is quite different than that of chopping samples on, say, an MPC, but once you get used to it, you can definitely get similar results. And using the MIDI outs, you can control external hardware synths, which was one of the original purposes of the device. That's all great, and trackers are known for being samplers first and foremost, but by far my favorite way to make sounds on the Mate is using the internal synth engines. The ability to use a handheld device to do sound design from scratch and then just roll right into coming up with song ideas is just really nice, and the way that this does it makes it unique among its peers. Us synthheads tend to prefer turning physical knobs to tweak synth parameters, but the Mate gives the closest approximation on a handheld device. You can smoothly tweak oscillator types, this is the macro synth in this case. You've got a ton of stuff to choose from, both traditional subtractive and little different. The plucked is really nice. And you've got all of these parameters like your timbre, this is a triple saw, so I'm messing with the distance between the different oscillators. We've got filters, we've got send effects, namely chorus, delay, and reverb. And if we go down here, we can actually tweak all of those parameters as well. And as you can probably hear, we've got LFOs going as well. So you've got two envelopes and two LFOs to work with. In this case, I'm modulating the timbre and the cutoff with the LFOs, and I've elected not to use the envelopes in this case. Or for another example, this is the wave synth that I showed you earlier. And we've got the cutoff being modulated by an envelope, and then just a subtle bit of movement introduced by the LFO. Let me run through a few of these as well. This is going to be a bit abrasive. And just for good measure, here's a kick on a sampler instrument. And we've also got fun stuff like detune and degrade, which you can drive pretty hard. I've covered multiple aspects of the user experience over the course of this video, but let's bring it all together and also talk about the hardware itself. Overall, the Mate is definitely not for everyone, as it requires quite a bit of patience and a bit of deliberateness while working with it. But if you can get past that, it is a device that does way more than its size suggests and is genuinely quite fun and a very unique experience to work with, even when compared to other hardware trackers like the Polyend Tracker. Even though you will have to memorize some button press combinations and it might feel a bit unintuitive or even intimidating to work with at first, it's really cleverly laid out, and I'm genuinely impressed with how all the individual components come together to make a whole greater than the sum of its parts. What I'm not so impressed with is the internal battery. I want to be very clear here, this absolutely could either be a problem with my specific unit or maybe be a result of user error on my part, but I've had trouble getting the battery to hold a charge over time. I tested it and mine went from 2/3 charged to about 1/4 charged over exactly 2 days of just sitting there idle. And about a couple weeks later, I just happened to check and it was completely dead. Fortunately, it's easy enough to power with one of these USB power banks, and so to me, that's actually not a huge deal. I'm going to be using this while sitting down anyway. Also, mine has a little rattle inside of it, but your mileage may vary. Other than that, it feels incredibly solidly built, very sleek, high quality. I'll happily put this in its little case and put that directly into my backpack, no problem. Once again, it's kind of the perfect travel device. And it's also got the built-in speaker, which is a nice bonus. I should also mention that I personally have never had a problem with the screen being as small as it is, but also I've got decent up-close vision, so your mileage might vary. Finally, let's get into some aspects that are like mildly connected. For one, I've heard some people saying that the Mate is the OP1 killer, and I want to interrogate that a little bit. Because on one hand, the user experiences of those devices are very completely and utterly different. The OP1 has the very free-form tape workflow, which is a little more like recording directly into a DAW, and then once you've recorded something, you can't really change it after the fact. Whereas on the Mate, everything is in step format, and so you can be constantly tweaking stuff as much as you want. And the OP1 is maybe a bit more free-flowing and free-spirited in the user experience, whereas the Mate is a bit more analytical. That being said, if you want something with comparable synth engines, more traditional effects like more traditional chorus, reverb, and delay, and an absolute ton of power crammed into a tiny device that can do multi-track export, in that case, the Mate absolutely is the OP1 killer, and when it comes to tiny portable powerhouses, I'll recommend the Mate over the OP1 to most people any day of the week. Also, if you're interested in just trying out the interface and sound engines but don't want to spring for the full device yet, look into trying it out headless. I'll leave a link in the description to more info on that. So that is my review of this retro, futuristic, tiny, strange little device. It's fast becoming one of my favorite and also most unique pieces of gear that I own. I'm really glad I bought it, and if you can get past the cons or just quirks that I've mentioned over the course of this video, this might be for you. If you'd like a more raw, less edited take on what it feels like to use, check out this video where I showed you my first experiences with it from beginner to intermediate, where I was getting my head around the interface and trying it out. That'll hopefully give you a pretty good idea of what it feels like to learn the device. And if you'd like to see more Mate stuff, you can click or tap down over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.